They said, "Thanksgiving will be chaotic. Mom, let's celebrate another time." But I'd already wrapped the deed. "We just think it's a little inappropriate for the kids to see you with a boyfriend, Mom, especially on Thanksgiving." That's what Jennifer said. Not in a scream. Not even with anger. She said it the way people comment on the weather. Casual, shrugging. As if my happiness was a coat too bright for the room. I stood there in my own kitchen, holding a tray of cranberry scones fresh from the oven, her favorite. The heat fogged my glasses. The words froze my hands. I thought maybe I'd misheard. But Ben stepped in a second later to confirm his voice. Too smooth, too rehearsed. "We just want to keep Thanksgiving simple this year. Mom, with everything going on, Chloe's cold. Dad Jenkins just got out of the hospital. The house is packed. Maybe we do something. Just us four. You understand, right? Just us four." They always said I was family. Until I became inconvenient. I looked down at the scones, steam still rising, sugar crust catching the morning light. They didn't even take any. Jennifer adjusted her purse strap, glanced at her Apple Watch like she had somewhere better to be. Ben kissed my cheek with the speed of someone avoiding confrontation. And that was it. Door shut. Silence. Only the ticking of the old cuckoo clock Walter fixed last month. I'd meant to tell them that it finally chimed again after 10 years of silence, but I didn't get the chance. They were gone before the clock struck the hour. Would you believe I wasn't even surprised? No, that came later. First came the numbness. Like stepping outside barefoot in November and pretending it isn't cold. I carried the scones to the table, set them down beside the envelope I'd been meaning to give them that day. Cream paper, gold seal. Inside, a notarized deed. To a small lake house in Maine. 3 bedrooms. Dock. Wraparound porch. Fully paid off. A gift. My surprise. I'd bought it with part of the inheritance money from my late cousin Martha. Money I hadn't told them about. I wanted it to be a joyful reveal. A let's build new memories here together kind of thing. I had even tucked a little card inside. For all the Thanksgivings ahead, love, Mom. And yet now I sat in the quiet, the scent of cinnamon and cranberry, thick in the air, wondering who I had been shopping joy for. Because it clearly wasn't me. Let me tell you something just in case no one ever has. The older you get, the more invisible your joy becomes. They still want your casseroles. They still want your babysitting. They still want your financial help when the roof leaks or the brakes squeal. But your happiness, your desire to be seen, heard, held, that's the part that makes them uncomfortable. That's the part they pretend doesn't fit the image of who you're supposed to be. Grandmother. Helper. Hollowed out smile in the corner. Not woman, not whole. Certainly not someone who dares to love again. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat there, elbows on the table, staring at that cream envelope. I'd folded the deed so carefully, tied it with a rust-colored ribbon that matched the leaves outside. I had even printed out photos of the lake, one in summer, one in fall. I imagined Chloe skipping stones across it, imagined Jennifer posting photos with a caption like, "Grateful for family getaways," as if I didn't exist outside the frame. The problem was, I did exist. And worse, I had started acting like it. Maybe that's what scared them, not the man, not Walter. But the fact that I had begun saying no, No, I couldn't drive across town on short notice when Jennifer needed a few hours to herself. No, I couldn't rearrange my physical therapy to pick up Chloe 3 times a week. No, I wouldn't skip the fall book club retreat just because Thanksgiving prep needed my energy. And then there was Walter. He wasn't flashy. Didn't drive a Lexus or quote roomy. He wore old suspenders, said darn it unironically, and once offered to sand my porch railing without asking for anything in return. We met at a Friends of the Library fundraiser. He made me laugh, that full-bellied kind of laugh I didn't know I still had. We danced once, at a barn party organized by the town seniors group. Just one slow song. My back ached afterward, but I went home smiling. A month later, Chloe saw us holding hands while walking through the farmer's market. She told her mom. And then everything changed. Jennifer called the next morning. Mom, I'm not saying you can't have a social life, but Chloe asked me if you were dating that old man. She seemed confused. I said gently, then explain it to her. I'm not ashamed. Silence on the line. Then I just think it sends mixed signals. You're her grandmother, not her friend. As if those two things were mutually exclusive. As if love for someone my age was a violation of decorum. I said nothing. But that silence was the first stone I laid in a new foundation. So now here I was, the turkey unbought, the house clean and quiet, the windows catching November light like stained glass in an empty chapel. I should have been with them, laughing, passing bowls, folding napkins. I should have been watching Chloe smear whipped cream on her nose and pretending to hate it. I should have been sitting at the far end of the table like always, the safe, soft background. But instead, I was here, fully present, fully excluded. And somewhere deep in that aching stillness, I felt the first clear truth I'd had in a very long time. They didn't want a person, they wanted a placeholder. I rose from the table, picked up the deed, and slid it back into the drawer beside my checkbook. Then I walked to the entryway and looked at the coat rack. Walter's navy scarf was still hanging there from our last walk around the lake. I ran my fingers across the fabric, and for the first time that day, I smiled. It's funny the way silence teaches you things. Noise never will. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the neighbor's pine trees, I sat on the edge of my bed, not doing anything in particular. No music, no TV, no phone in my hand. Just stillness. The kind you don't choose but which chooses you anyway. I glanced at the small crocheted pillow Walter's sister had made for me last spring. It's never too late to begin again, it read in curly blue thread. I used to think it was sweet. Now I wondered if it was true. I wasn't always this version of myself. I used to be a woman people counted on. Not out of affection, though they would have said it was, but out of pattern. I was the reliable presence, the safe drawer that always had batteries, the quiet kitchen where the soup always simmered. I was the porch light they left on but never walked toward. And for decades I thought that was enough. When Harold passed 11 years ago this spring, I folded myself into the shape they needed. I didn't grieve loudly, didn't ask for help. I just showed up. With cookies, with casseroles, with folded laundry and last-minute babysitting. They praised me for it. You're so strong, Mom. I don't know how you do it, Grandma. You're always there, like a coat rack, like a cushion, like furniture. I remember one Christmas 2 years after Harold died, when I stayed up until 3 a.m., knitting scarves for everyone. I didn't have much else to give that year. Money had been tight. I dipped into my savings to help Ben cover their roof repair after a bad storm. They unwrapped the scarves politely. Jennifer smiled and said, "Oh, this is very homey." Chloe left hers on the floor. No one noticed when I quietly gathered it later and placed it back in the gift bag. I told myself it didn't matter. That meaning was in the giving. But deep down, a small, stubborn part of me whispered, if no one sees the giver, did the gift even exist? I used to love Thanksgiving. Not because of the turkey, though I've been told my cornbread stuffing could win prizes, but because it felt like a pause, a breath, a day where the world said, "You've done enough. You are enough. Let's sit together and be grateful." But somewhere along the way, I stopped being invited to the table. Not physically, not at first, but emotionally. Even when I was there, I was no longer with them. Ben scrolled through work emails. Jennifer whispered about calories and portion control. Chloe filmed dances in the hallway instead of helping set the table. I became a background hum, like the dishwasher or the wind against the window panes. Last year, after dinner, I'd walked out onto their deck to catch my breath. It had been a long day, full of noise, but not conversation. Full of bodies, but not presence. Walter had texted earlier, "Thinking of you today. I hope they see you." I never replied. I'd been afraid. Afraid that if I let him in truly in, I might have to let go of the role I had mastered for so long. The role of the good mother, the selfless widow, the woman who gives, 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 until no one remembers she had a name before Grandma. But now, sitting there in my own house, empty, but finally honest, I began to wonder, who am I when no one is watching? Who do I become when I stop performing family and start choosing self? And perhaps, more importantly, what if love isn't over, just misdirected for too long? Who do I become when I stop performing family and start choosing self? I went to the hall closet, pulled down the old metal file box Harold once called my command center. He used to tease me for keeping paper copies of everything. I kept doing it long after he passed, not out of habit, but because paper never forgets. Inside were folders, cream-colored, labeled in block letters. Mortgage support, Ben. Medical Chloe's surgery, 2019. Vehicle loan, Toyota Highlander. I flipped through each one like reading chapters of a novel I had written but never published. Thousands of dollars. Quiet loans, forgiven debts, grocery deliveries, emergency school fees. The month Ben lost his job, and I covered their electric and gas and insurance all at once, no one had ever paid me back. But worse, no one had ever asked if I could afford it. They assumed I could, because I always did. I paused on one receipt, $4,000 for a summer STEM camp for Chloe. Jennifer had called it essential for her future. I hadn't even been invited to the end of camp showcase. They'd sent a photo after the fact. Chloe holding a robot standing beside Jennifer's parents. I wasn't in the frame, not even in the mention, and yet I kept giving, not just money, time, energy, pieces of myself carved thin so they could have more space. I thought I was building connection, but now I saw it more clearly. I was funding a relationship that didn't exist. I sat back on the floor, papers spread around me like fallen leaves. My knees ached. My chest felt tight. But I wasn't sad. Not in the way I used to be. What I felt now was something quieter, heavier, the weight of clarity. I'd spent years trying to make myself indispensable, not out of arrogance, but fear, because I thought if I stopped being useful, I'd stop being loved. And maybe that was true. Maybe in their world I only mattered if I produced something, a meal, a check, a favor. But Walter never asked for any of that. He brought me oranges when I had the flu. He rewired my porch light without being asked. He said once while we sat watching ducks near the lake, "You don't have to earn your space, Margot. You are the space." No one had ever said that to me before, not even Harold. I looked over at the dining table. The cranberry scones were still there, cooling, uneaten, beside them a single mug. Jennifer's favorite, the one that said, "World's Best Daughter-in-Law." She gave it to me 6 years ago on a Mother's Day brunch she didn't cook, but insisted we host at my house. She used my dishes, my eggs, my electricity, then left early for a yoga class. I hadn't touched the mug in years. Tonight I picked it up, turned it in my hands, then walked to the sink and set it down without rinsing. Some symbols aren't worth polishing. That night before bed, I opened the drawer beside my nightstand. Inside was a small stack of photos. Not the albums, those were curated. These were different. Snapshots I had kept privately. Walter laughing with mustard on his shirt. Me at a community garden holding a head of lettuce bigger than my own. A selfie, my first taken by Lily, the neighbor's girl, with both of us mid-laugh. These weren't posed. They weren't filtered. But they were real, and I was in the center. I lay back on the pillow and stared at the ceiling. I thought about the lake house, about the ribbon around the deed, and for the first time since I bought it, I realized something. Maybe it wasn't meant to be a gift to make them love me. Maybe it was meant to be a place where I could remember who I was before I forgot myself. Maybe it wasn't meant to make them love me. Maybe it was meant to help me remember who I was. The next morning, I didn't rush to do anything. That might not sound remarkable to you, but when you've spent the better part of 40 years defining your worth by how early you can get up to get things started, it's a revolution. I made my tea slowly, the good kind. Loose leaves from the shop Walter had introduced me to. I didn't use the chipped mug from Jennifer. I chose the porcelain one with the hand-painted marigolds, a gift from myself to myself last spring. The sun hadn't even fully risen when I sat down at the kitchen table and opened the drawer with the deed again. It was still there, unfolded, quiet, waiting. I laid it flat beside a yellow notepad and clicked my pen. Then I began writing, Revision of Beneficiary. November 29th, 2025. I didn't know the legal phrasing exactly, but I knew what I wanted. To whomever this concerns, the lake house located at 2 Laurel Creek Lane, purchased with personal funds and held solely in my name, is no longer intended as a gift to my son, Benjamin Halberd, or his immediate family. Instead, it is to be designated for community use, a seasonal retreat for women over 60 seeking rest, refuge, or reconnection. This property is to be managed and stewarded by a local trust, overseen initially by myself, Margot Halberd, and Ms. Reina Vasquez, resident of 418 Maple Street, who has demonstrated integrity, compassion, and commitment to human dignity in her daily life. I paused, let the ink settle, then added, and most of all, someone who never once asked me to be less in order to be loved. By the time I finished, the kettle had boiled twice over. I didn't even notice. I tucked the paper under a weight and went to the porch. The morning air was crisp and brave, the kind of air that makes you pull your sweater tighter, but also sit up straighter. A cardinal landed on the railing, bright red against the grays of late fall. Walter once said they show up when you're ready to start again. I believed him. I spent the rest of the morning baking. Not out of habit, but out of purpose. Not the usual platters labeled with masking tape for Ben. No nuts. Jennifer, no carbs. Chloe vegan preferred. No, this time, I baked what I loved, what I remembered. Walnut scones with orange zest. Pumpkin bread with too many chocolate chips. The sugar-dusted pecan cookies from my grandmother's recipe, the one Jennifer called old-fashioned, like it was a flaw. I packed them in tins I'd saved for years, not with names, just small notes. You are seen. You are remembered. You are enough. One tin for Raina, one for Lily, one for Walter, who always said cookies were better than flowers, and one I didn't label at all. I just left it open on the counter beside the kettle, for anyone who knocked. By noon, I had washed and dried every dish. The house smelled like cinnamon and warm resolve. Then I changed clothes, not into something glamorous, but something true. Dark jeans, a forest green wool sweater. Harold gave me our last Christmas. The one he said made me look dangerously elegant. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I hadn't visited in years. Not the mother, not the helper, the woman. That's when the doorbell rang, and not in the way a delivery driver rings fast and forgettable. No, this was hesitant, soft. One chime. I froze for a second, heart fluttering in a way I didn't expect. Then walked slowly to the door and opened it. It was Walter, wearing his old brown coat and carrying a bouquet of sunflowers in one hand. He held them up like a peace offering. I figured, if you weren't at their table, maybe I could sit at yours. I blinked, just once, then stepped aside and said, "Come in. I've got cookies." I figured, if you weren't at their table, maybe I could sit at yours. Walter didn't ask questions right away. He stepped inside like a man entering a sanctuary, not a stranger's house. Took off his coat, shook the rain from his hat, and placed the sunflowers in the sink like he'd done it 100 times before. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same one that not 24 hours ago had felt like a memorial to a life that hadn't even ended yet. Now it felt claimed. He reached for a cookie, took a bite, closed his eyes. "Tastes like forgiveness," he said, crumbs dusting his collar. I laughed. It was soft at first, but real. We didn't talk about Ben or Jennifer, not yet. Instead, we talked about the frost coming in early this year, about how the neighbor's dog had gotten loose again, about how my azaleas were stubborn and still blooming. Then he looked at me real serious. "I want you to know something, Margot. If you want me here, just here in your life in whatever shape it is, I'm ready. No expectations. No adjustments. Just room for joy if you want it." I felt something in my throat, a knot of all the years I'd pretended I didn't need this. I nodded slow. "I think I'm finally making room for it." After he left, promising to come back the next morning with coffee and no opinions unless requested, I turned off the porch light and sat again at my desk. This time I opened a different drawer. Inside my will, I had written the original with the help of a lawyer Ben recommended. Funny how easy it is to write your life in ink before you've lived the last chapters. I pulled it out, read the language. So clinical, so obedient. Assets to be divided equally between surviving offspring and direct descendants. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I reached for a pen, a thick black one, the kind that doesn't smudge. And I began again. Revised will to be witnessed and notarized by December 1st. To my son, Benjamin, and daughter-in-law, Jennifer, I leave my love, my memories, and the understanding that love not returned is still love given. You were given more than money. You were given decades. May you find peace in that. You will receive no further inheritance nor access to funds in my accounts or holdings. To my granddaughter Chloe, when and if she wishes to find me as a person, not a utility, I remain open, but not available by default. A letter will be left for her at the time of my passing. To the Women's Circle of Ash Hollow Library, I leave a portion of my estate to continue the Late Bloomers program, a monthly gathering for women over 60 beginning again. To Reina Vasquez, I entrust the stewardship of the Laurel Creek House. Do with it what we both promised we would build rest into the bones of those forgotten by their families. And to Walter, should he still want the honor, the right to plant whatever he pleases in the garden I once thought would never grow again. I signed my name, the same signature I'd used for years on checks on permission slips on baked goods sent without thanks. But this time I signed it for me. Then I stood up, walked outside to the shed, and for the first time in over a decade pulled out the little hand-painted sign Harold made back when we first bought the cabin in Maine, the Halberd Hideaway. I wiped off the dust, and with one swift motion painted over the name in white primer. Tomorrow I would repaint it. Tomorrow it would say something new. I signed it for me. The first text came 2 days later. Ben, hey Mom, did you mean to change your bank password? I tried logging in to pay the utilities like usual, but it says access denied. Like usual. As if my account were their drawer to open. As if autonomy were an accident. I didn't reply. The second message arrived that evening, this time from Jennifer. Hi, Margot. Just checking in. Chloe mentioned she hasn't seen you in a while and was wondering if you're okay. We're a little worried. They always wrap control in concern. As if proximity equals love. As if love equals availability. I set the phone down. Let it buzz against the table until it gave up. Then I walked outside. Walter had just finished planting bulbs in the side garden. He stood up, slow knees cracking like old floorboards, and gave me a look that didn't ask for anything. You ready to tell them yet? He asked gently. I shook my head. They already heard. They just didn't listen. He smiled. That's their habit. Not your problem. We stood in the quiet. No explanations. No apologies. Just the sound of leaves rustling into their own kind of applause. The next day, Ben called. I let it ring 4 times. Then picked up. Mom, he said, without preamble, we saw the email from your attorney. Is this a joke? I breathed in through my nose. Held it. Let it go. No, Ben. It's not. You're disinheriting us after everything. After all these years, I'm not disinheriting you, I said. Calmly. I'm releasing myself. Silence. Then, we're family. You say that when you need something, I said, still calm. But when I needed to be seen, not just used, you closed the door. He scoffed. This is because of him, isn't it? That man, you're throwing everything away for a fling. That's when I felt it. Not rage, not sorrow, not even surprise, just confirmation. No, Ben, I said quietly. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm reclaiming what was mine all along. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm reclaiming what was mine all along. Jennifer showed up on a Sunday. Unannounced, of course. The way people do when they think the world still spins around their preferences. I saw her car from the kitchen window, sleek silver, least the kind of vehicle you choose when appearances matter more than ownership. She stood on the porch in her workout clothes, holding a coffee she hadn't brewed and a face that looked more tight than sorry. I opened the door slowly. "Hi, Margot," she said like we hadn't spoken in weeks, like she wasn't half of the reason I'd spent Thanksgiving alone. Jennifer. I didn't invite her in. She noticed. Her smile tightened. "Can we talk?" I leaned against the frame. Calm. "We're already doing that." She cleared her throat, eyes darting past me into the house, like she was still looking for the version of me she preferred. Apron, clad tired but useful. Ben told me about the changes, the will, the account blocks, the cabin. I nodded. "Yes, I think you might be acting emotionally, out of anger or worse. Manipulation. He said that man has been staying over, that he's influencing things." Ah, there it was, the real fear. Not that I was lonely, but that I was no longer controllable. I looked her in the eye. "Walter doesn't tell me what to do, Jennifer. That's what makes him different." She flushed. "But we're your family." "So is anyone who sees me," I replied, steady. "You've had years to prove love. You used it as leverage instead." She blinked fast. "Tears or performance? Sometimes they're indistinguishable. This isn't you. You're not cruel." I tilted my head. Wanting peace isn't cruelty. Choosing not to be mined for convenience isn't betrayal. It's finally truth. She swallowed hard, looked away. "What about Chloe?" "She loves you." That one almost pierced. Almost. "She's welcome here. When she comes as herself, not your envoy." I opened the door wider, gently. "You're welcome too. But only if you're not here to negotiate my worth." Jennifer hesitated. For 1 second, her eyes flickered not with warmth, but calculation. Then she stepped back. "I hope you'll reconsider." "I already have. That's why I'm standing here." I closed the door. Not hard, not loud, just firm. Then I turned around, leaned against the wood, and exhaled. Walter was in the garden again, whistling some off-key hymn. He looked up when I came out. "All quiet?" he asked. "Louder than ever," I smiled. That night, I sat at the table alone. Not lonely alone. I wrote one last letter. Not for court, not for show. Just a note sealed in an envelope to be opened after I'm gone. To Chloe. If you find this, it means you looked. Know that I always loved you, not for what you needed from me, but for who I saw in your eyes when you were too young to pretend. Come find me when you're ready to be real. I'll be waiting in stories, in cookies, in the sound of the lake at dusk. I folded it, tied it with twine. Then I smiled. Not because I'd won anything, but because I'd stopped losing myself. Not because I'd won anything, but because I'd stopped losing myself. The first snow came early that year. It dusted the porch steps like powdered sugar, soft and unannounced. I watched it fall from the big window by the reading chair, the one I'd finally moved to face the light instead of the hallway. For years, I'd sat with my back to the sun. Now I understood why my house always felt cold. Life after declaration is quiet. Not because things stop happening, but because you stop needing to explain your choices to people who never ask the right questions. Ben hadn't called since the visit from Jennifer. Not to demand, not to apologize, just silence. And that silence, once unbearable, had become oddly kind. I no longer filled it with guilt. I let it sit beside me at breakfast on the porch in the car. Silence, I'd learned, is not the absence of love. Sometimes it's the start of respect for yourself. Walter came by most afternoons, sometimes with soup, sometimes with stories, sometimes with nothing but his tired hands and the knowledge that nothing needed fixing. We didn't label things, not our feelings, not our plans. Just let them grow like the daffodils he planted too late in the season, but swore would bloom anyway. One evening, as we sat wrapped in mismatched blankets by the fire pit, he looked over and said, "You know, I think we get a second adolescence when we age right." "What do you mean?" "First one's for figuring out who we aren't. Second one's for finally living as who we are." I smiled. "Then I'm about 3 months old." "Hell of a baby," he grinned. I started saying yes again. But only to things that said yes back. Yes to joining the Thursday book group at the library, even when they read things I wouldn't have picked. Yes to learning watercolor from Raina, even though my lemons looked like potatoes. Yes to letting Lily teach me how to make a TikTok, even though I still call it the tick. And most of all, yes to waking up without an alarm, without a chore list, without the ache of invisible obligations. The lake house took on a new rhythm, too. We hosted our first late bloomers retreat in March, 4 women, all over 60 each, carrying a grief that didn't need fixing, just naming. They arrived unsure. They left laughing. We didn't promise solutions, just space. And for women like us who'd spent lifetimes shrinking to fit other people's frames, space was the most sacred thing we could offer. Yes to waking up without the ache of invisible obligations. Spring arrived in the quiet way real change does, without parade, without permission. Just a slow unfolding. The daffodils bloomed. Walter had been right. They'd spent months in the dark working quietly beneath the soil. And then one morning, there they were, standing tall, facing the sun, just like me. I got a letter in April, handwritten, careful. The return address read C. Halberd Emerson College, Boston. Inside, only a short note. "Hi, Grandma. I know I wasn't brave before. I see things now that I didn't. Can I come visit this summer? Not for help. Just for you." I held the letter to my chest, not as victory, but as grace. When people choose you without agenda, that's love, even if it takes years, even if it comes late, especially then. Walter and I sat on the dock that evening. The lake had thawed, calm as glass. We didn't speak for a while, just breathed in the kind of silence that feels like home. Then he reached into his coat and handed me a small box. Wooden, smooth, with my initials carved in his crooked script. Inside was a single brass key. "It's for the garden shed," he said, "or the front door. or the cabin up north I haven't built yet. Use it for whatever you want, or not at all. Just know you have it. I didn't cry. I just held it. Sometimes holding something is enough. That night, I stood in the hallway, looking at the mirror by the front door. It used to be the place I checked my reflection before company came making sure I looked presentable. Now I looked to see if I was recognizable, and I was. Not younger, not polished, just true. And so this is where I am. Not where they placed me, not where I was told to stay, but where I chose. No longer waiting for a seat at someone else's table. I built my own under oak trees by quiet lakes beside good men with soft eyes and steady hands. And when people come now, they come with open hearts. Or not at all. And that's okay. If you're listening to this and wondering if it's too late to begin again, I'll tell you what I learned on the porch that night, holding a cookie in one hand and a life reclaimed in the other. You don't need an invitation to matter. You don't need approval to take up space. You don't need permission to be joyful. You just need to stop asking the wrong people the right questions and start asking yourself this: what would it look like if I didn't disappear? Then go find out. We'll be here holding your seat by the lake. This has been another story from Eleanor Speaks. If it stirred something inside, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. And when you're ready, come sit with us again.